What if a single machine, not a general, not an army, not even a full-scale offensive, quietly altered the outcome of the Second World War? What if the fate of millions hinged on a design no larger than a rural workshop blueprint, a vehicle that merged speed, steel, and simplicity into one improbable force? June 1941. The sky above the frontier turns red as the largest invasion in human history accelerates eastward. German panzers tear across the landscape in fast-moving spearheads, their engines roaring with the confidence of armies that have never known defeat. The road to Moscow lies open, straight as an arrow, unprotected. Then something unexpected appears on the horizon. Angular armor, unfamiliar silhouette, wide tracks crushing the soil. German shells strike, spark, and bounce. Radio waves ripple with panic. Achtung! New Soviet tank, impenetrable front armor. And suddenly, the unstoppable begins to slow. Good evening. I'm Knightley. Tonight we uncover the cinematic story of the T-34, the tank that became the Red Army's edge, and changed the clock of history. Imagine being a German tank commander in the summer of 1941. Your regiment has swept across Poland, crushed France in 6 weeks, and sent British forces scrambling from Dunkirk. Confidence isn't just high, it's absolute. Your machine, a Panzer III or IV, is proven, reliable, superior to anything fielded so far. Then suddenly, something you've never seen before rolls out of the morning haze. Your 37mm shells ricochet harmlessly from its armor. Its diesel engine hums with a deeper tone. Its tracks are twice as wide. Gliding across mud your own machine sinks into. You try closing the distance, hoping to flank. But the new tank, the T-34, accelerates faster, strikes harder, and shrugs off anything you throw at it. A weapon like this doesn't just surprise armies, it rewrites the battlefield. Tonight we travel from the drawing boards of Kharkiv to the snow of Moscow, the fields of Kursk, and the streets of Berlin, following one machine that refused to break. Before we dive deeper, understand the stakes. The Eastern Front was not merely another battlefield, it was a continent-wide struggle where entire nations hung in the balance. On one side, the industrial, disciplined German Wehrmacht. On the other, the vast but shaken Soviet Union, suffering from purges, inconsistent leadership, and logistical chaos. Everyone expected the USSR to fall in months. Some predicted weeks. But then came the steel that refused to yield. The T-34 didn't win by perfection. It won by timing, appearing exactly when the Soviet Union needed a miracle. When the Blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable, this tank stalled its momentum. When the Red Army was on the brink, this machine gave them time. When the war demanded a weapon that could be built fast, repaired anywhere and driven by anyone, the T-34 answered. This isn't just the story of a tank. It's the story of how engineering, industry, and sheer necessity converged into a symbol of survival. Picture the opening hours of Operation Barbarossa. Columns of German troops pour across the border at dawn. Aircraft streak across the sky in precise formations. Radio networks hum with disciplined chatter. The invasion is moving like a machine, smooth, synchronized, unstoppable. But the war doesn't always reward perfection. Sometimes it rewards resilience. Across the Soviet landscape, in camouflaged bunkers and improvised trenches, tank crews scramble into vehicles many have trained in for only hours. Some engines fail, some radios don't work. Yet among the chaos, a handful of machines stand out. The sloped armor catches the rising sun at sharp angles. The tracks, wide and confident, dig into Ukrainian soil. The gun, a 76.2mm cannon, promises reach and impact. A German reconnaissance pilot spots them first. His report sounds impossible. Medium tanks, unknown model, armor angled, our weapons ineffective. Those words, uttered in disbelief, mark the moment Germany's strategic calculations begin to crack, and this is only the beginning. So tonight, as we begin this story, ask yourself, how does one design, one tank, change the momentum of a war fought by millions? How does a nation on the verge of collapse produce a weapon that becomes its lifeline? How does a machine built under pressure, in factories evacuated mid-war, become the steel fist that punches a path from Stalingrad to Berlin? These are not hypothetical questions. They're the threads that weave through every battlefield the T-34 touched. From Dubno-Brody, the first massive tank battle, to the defense of Moscow, the meat-grinder streets of Stalingrad, the decisive plains of Kursk, and finally the ruins of Berlin. As we journey together piece by piece, you'll see how the T-34 shaped strategies, forced adaptations, and compelled the world to rethink what a tank could be. Because the T-34 wasn't merely a weapon, it was time itself, purchased in steel. Welcome to the beginning of the Red Army's edge. Before moving forward, I want to thank all of you, our viewers from around the world, for joining another deep dive into history's turning points. This channel has always aimed to bring mature, factual storytelling to those who appreciate the quieter truths behind the loudest battles. Tonight's story is one of industry, innovation, surprise, and endurance, told not through glory but through cause and effect. So settle in, because what you're about to see reveals not only how the T-34 fought, but why it mattered. The storm of war is gathering, the stage is set. The roads to Minsk, Smolensk, and Moscow are already trembling under thousands of tracked vehicles. And somewhere beyond the front lines, the factories of Kharkiv, Stalingrad, and Chelyabinsk are preparing to unleash something that will reshape the conflict. This is where the real story begins. To understand why the T-34 mattered, we must first return to Europe in the summer of 1941, a continent shaped by victories that seemed to prove German supremacy. Hitler's armies had crushed Poland in weeks, bypassed the Maginot Line, defeated France with breathtaking speed, and pushed the British Expeditionary Force off the continent. Blitzkrieg had become more than a tactic. It was a belief, a certainty that mobility, coordination, and shock could break any opponent. Across the border, the Soviet Union appeared vulnerable. Years of political purges had hollowed out its military leadership. Equipment was numerous but aging. Logistics were sprawling and inefficient. Many European observers believed the USSR would crumble the moment the Wehrmacht crossed the frontier. Yet beneath this surface of weakness, something was brewing, quietly, relentlessly, in factories scattered across Ukraine and Russia. A machine that would soon rewrite every assumption about armored warfare. But in June 1941, nobody outside a few Soviet design bureaus could predict how important that machine would become. Operation Barbarossa, launched on June 22, 1941, remains the largest single military invasion in history. 3 million German soldiers advanced along a front, stretching nearly 1,800 miles. They were organized into 3 powerful army groups. Army Group North, heading for Leningrad. Army Group Center, aiming directly at Moscow. Army Group South, pushing into Ukraine. Accompanying them were 3,350 tanks and over 2,700 aircraft. German doctrine relied on speed, precise coordination, and concentrated force. Their armored spearheads were expected to collapse Soviet defenses before they could mount a meaningful response. Soviet forces were vast on paper. Millions of men, thousands of tanks, nearly 20,000 aircraft. But numbers didn't tell the full story. Many formations were understrength, poorly supplied, and commanded by officers appointed more for political loyalty than battlefield experience. Training hours for tank crews were shockingly low. Many drivers received only basic familiarization before being thrown into combat. The stage was set for one of history's greatest confrontations, and for a machine designed for a different kind of war. As German troops surged east, the Luftwaffe dominated the skies. Within the first 48 hours, thousands of Soviet aircraft were destroyed, many on the ground. Communication lines collapsed as German units cut across roads, bridges, and supply hubs. Entire Soviet armies were encircled in sweeping pincer movements, suffering enormous losses. In the early weeks, it appeared the German plan was working flawlessly. Cities fell one after another. Minsk collapsed in days. Smolensk followed soon after. Army Group Center advanced over 400 miles in less than a month. Against this backdrop, most Soviet tanks encountered were older T-26 and BT series vehicles, machines vulnerable to German 37mm and 50-meter guns. Crews struggled to coordinate attacks. Radios were scarce, mechanical breakdowns rampant, and fuel often ran out mid-March. German officers wrote confidently that the Soviet Union would be defeated before the year ended. But scattered among these outdated machines were a few unfamiliar shapes, sometimes encountered alone, sometimes in small groups, that refused to fall the way others had. The Germans didn't yet know it, but these encounters were the first whispers of a coming storm. The Soviet Union, despite internal turmoil, had invested deeply in armored forces during the 1930s. Their doctrine envisioned tanks not merely as infantry support, but as independent formations capable of breakthrough, pursuit, and deep penetration. This philosophy produced the massive, mechanized corps, formations with hundreds of tanks each. But theory and practice rarely matched. By 1941, these corps were poorly supplied, poorly trained, scattered across wide fronts, led by inexperienced commanders. When Barbarossa began, many units received contradictory orders. Hold the line, retreat, counterattack, advance, all within hours. Fuel convoys were destroyed by airstrikes, ammunition depots captured, and communication failures caused entire brigades to move blindly. Yet even amid this chaos, reports from German field units became increasingly uneasy. New Russian tanks spotted with angled armor, our shells ineffective. Unknown medium tank survives repeated hits. Wide tracks allow easy movement across soft ground. These were the first battlefield sightings of the T-34, a tank Germany had not expected, not planned for, and was not equipped to counter in mid-1941. The shock was only beginning. Let's step away from the battlefield and look at the strategic landscape from each side's perspective. For Germany, the goal was simple: destroy the Red Army west of the Dnieper River, seize key cities, and force Soviet collapse before winter. German planners believed the USSR lacked the economic strength to sustain prolonged war. They also believed Soviet equipment was outdated, a dangerous miscalculation. For the Soviet Union, their leadership expected conflict, but not at this scale, not this suddenly, and not across such a vast frontier. Many supply depots were positioned dangerously close to the border, and mobilization was incomplete. The Red Army sought to slow the German advance, buy time, and regroup deeper inside the country. This mismatch of expectations created an initial imbalance. German forces enjoyed momentum and coordination. Soviet forces relied on sheer numbers, endurance, and geography. But as German supply lines stretched thinner and their engines struggled with dust and heat, Soviet defenses stiffened. More importantly, new tank brigades equipped with the T-34 were gradually arriving from deeper inside the USSR. A new phase of the war was forming, one where technology would begin balancing numbers. The T-34's arrival on the battlefield wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a gradual revelation. German tank commanders first dismissed it as a fluke, an experimental model, perhaps a rare heavy vehicle. But by early July 1941, patterns emerged. Reports described armor plates sharply angled, a 76.2mm gun outranging German weapons, wide tracks gliding across terrain that bogged down panzers, diesel engines less prone to fire than German gasoline engines. Most alarming of all was the tank's resilience. German 37mm Paquet 36 anti-tank guns, the backbone of infantry defense, proved nearly useless against it beyond very short ranges. This was not just another tank, it was a fundamental shift in armored design philosophy, and as German officers urgently requested stronger guns and heavier vehicles, Soviet factories continued producing more T-34s, preparing to push them into action anywhere the front line threatened to collapse. The war's balance was beginning to bend. Finally, consider the broader geopolitical stakes. If the Soviet Union fell, Germany would dominate the continent from the Atlantic to the Urals. The Western Allies would lose the possibility of a second front. Germany could redirect its full industrial and military strength toward Britain and, eventually, the United States. Every city lost, every mile retreated, placed the Soviet Union closer to this catastrophic outcome. That is why the T-34's role cannot be understated. This tank didn't simply fight. It bought time. Time for evacuation of 1,500 factories to the Urals. Time for Siberian divisions to redeploy west. Time for new defensive lines to form around Moscow. Time for Soviet leadership to reorganize command structures. Without those crucial months purchased by resilient defenses, many of which were anchored by T-34 units. The story of Weeksy 2 might have looked drastically different. This section isn't just background. It's the foundation upon which the entire Eastern Front was built. And now, with the stage set, the storm is about to begin. To understand the T-34's impact, we must trace its origins back to the 1930s, a decade defined by rapid mechanization and grim anticipation. The Soviet Union, still learning from the failures and triumphs of its early armored forces, recognized one truth. Any future conflict in Europe would be fought with speed and machines, not trenches and horses. At the Kharkiv locomotive factory, factory number 183, a design bureau led by Mikhail Koshkin began to rethink what a medium tank could be. Their goal wasn't merely to match foreign designs, it was to leap ahead of them. The foundations were laid by earlier experiments, with fast BT series tanks using the Christie suspension, imported secretly from the United States. These tanks were quick but lightly armored and prone to catching fire. Koshkin proposed something radical. A tank combining the speed of the BT with the protective strength of a heavy vehicle. A tank that could operate in mud, snow, ice and forests, the natural terrains of Eastern Europe. This concept gave birth to a project that would eventually become the T-34. The political environment added pressure. Soviet intelligence reported rapidly expanding German armor programs. Factories in Germany were producing new Panzer III and IV variants with improved armor and optics. Hitler's speeches haunted Soviet planners with references to living space in the East. The Red Army needed a tank that wasn't just good. It needed a tank that could outperform anything Germany expected. But Stalin demanded results quickly, often pushing unrealistic deadlines. Designers worked through nights, fighting bureaucratic resistance from officials who favored older models like the T-28 and T-35. Despite this pressure, Koshkin championed a simple principle. Build a tank every soldier can operate, every factory can produce, and every battlefield can support. By 1939, two prototypes were ready, the A-20 with convertible wheel track drive and the A-32 fully tracked with thicker armor. The A-32 impressed engineers with its durability and firepower, leading to one of the most consequential design decisions of the war. The A-32 was chosen as the future medium tank, its new name, T-34. To prove the design's reliability, Koshkin ordered a daring test no one expected. In early 1940, two prototypes, stripped of luxury, loaded with spare parts, were driven from Kharkiv to Moscow across 2,000 kilometers of harsh winter terrain. Blizzards pounded the vehicles, roads vanished under snow, temperatures dropped below 40 degrees CC. But the tanks kept moving. Their wide tracks distributed weight evenly, preventing the sinking that plagued narrow-track vehicles. Their diesel engines ignited even in freezing conditions. When the tanks finally arrived in Moscow, covered in ice and mud, they stunned Red Army officials. The Kremlin demonstration that followed sealed their fate. Despite criticism from some senior officers demanding even more armor, Stalin approved immediate production. The tank's defining features were now set. Sloped armor, providing superior ballistic protection, a powerful 76.2mm cannon, a robust diesel engine, wide tracks for cross-country mobility. These innovations gave the T-34 a battlefield presence unlike anything the Wehrmacht had encountered. But innovation alone couldn't win a war. Production scale would matter even more. Soviet industry in the late 1930s was ambitious but inconsistent. Factories were modernizing, but supply chains were fragile. Nonetheless, the decision was made. T-34 production would be distributed across several key plants. Factory number 183, Kharkiv, the primary assembly line, Stalingrad tractor factory, later a major producer despite being bombed repeatedly. Kirov factory, Leningrad, secondary output during the early war years. The goal for 1941 was modest by later standards, around 1,500 tanks. But even reaching this target became difficult due to material shortages, labor turnover and political oversight. Crew training lagged far behind production. Many T-34 units in early 1941 received their tanks only days before Barbarossa began. Some commanders had never seen the vehicle they were supposed to lead, yet despite these problems, the T-34 represented a technological leap. German inspectors who examined captured models in 1941 wrote with disbelief, "Superior to any of our tanks in armor, armament, and mobility." The strategic build-up was slow but unmistakable. A new kind of warfare was approaching. While the Soviets built toward a new armored future, German planners focused on refining the Blitzkrieg model. The Wehrmacht emphasized coordinated radio communication, precise combined arms tactics, disciplined logistics, rapid encirclement maneuvers. Their tanks were not individually superior, but they were part of a system that had already conquered much of Europe. German intelligence failures now proved costly. Reports described most Soviet tanks as obsolete, lightly armored models. No mention was made of sloped armor or diesel engines. No warning was issued about a medium tank with armor comparable to a heavy vehicle. The Wehrmacht entered the Soviet Union confident that their Panzer III and IV could defeat anything on the field. But by July 1941, shaken reports from frontline commanders told a different story. Their 37mm guns were ineffective. Their 50mm guns struggled at distance. Only 88mm anti-aircraft guns, used in desperation, could reliably penetrate the T-34's armor. The existence of the T-34 forced Germany to rethink its tank development programs. The seeds of the Tiger and Panther programs were planted not in German design rooms, but on the battlefields of Ukraine. Inside Soviet command headquarters, the pressure was immense. The first weeks of Barbarossa were catastrophic. Entire armies were encircled, supply lines collapsed, the Luftwaffe destroyed thousands of aircraft, creating massive gaps in reconnaissance. Amid this chaos, the T-34's role expanded rapidly. Units that received even a handful of T-34s suddenly found themselves capable of halting or slowing German spearheads. These localized successes convinced Soviet leadership to accelerate production at any cost. Stalin ordered factories relocated east of the Ural Mountains, a monumental undertaking involving millions of workers, thousands of trains, and hundreds of industrial plants. Factories were dismantled, transported and reassembled while still producing tanks. At Chelyabinsk, the Tankergrad complex emerged almost overnight, eventually becoming one of the world's largest armored production centers. Despite shortages, machines rolled off assembly lines relentlessly. Some tanks left factories with rough welds or missing paint, but their engines, guns, and armor remained reliable. Skilled craftsmanship had been replaced by brutal efficiency, an approach that fit the T-34 perfectly. On the German side, the increasing encounters with T-34s caused growing concern. Reports from officers in Army Group Center and South urgently requested stronger weapons. Commanders noted that the new Soviet tank outperformed their own in cross-country mobility, especially in mud. German engineers studied captured T-34s and were shocked by its simplicity. Where German tanks used complex gearboxes and intricate machining, the T-34 employed rugged components that could be mass-produced with lower tolerances. Its sloped armor inspired the design of the Panther. Its wide tracks influenced future German models. But Germany faced a problem the Soviet Union had already solved. The German industrial base was smaller and depended heavily on precision manufacturing. Producing thousands of new, complex tanks quickly was impossible. The Soviet strategy, prioritized numbers, reliability, and ease of repair, now proved decisive. Germany, by contrast, moved toward increasingly complicated designs that would strain its industry for the rest of the war. The T-34 wasn't just a battlefield challenge, it triggered a strategic shift in enemy planning. As factories intensified production, Soviet military planners began reorganizing their armored forces. The massive mechanized corps of 1941, unwieldy and difficult to supply, were replaced with streamlined tank brigades and later tank corps built around T-34s. These new formations were easier to command, easier to supply, and far more responsive in fast-changing battle conditions. Training programs expanded dramatically. New recruits learned gunnery, maintenance, and coordination at accelerated rates. Tank crew survivability remained low, but turnover allowed constant infusion of fresh personnel. By late 1942, entire divisions were equipped with T-34s. By 1943, they formed the backbone of Soviet armored operations. The strategic build-up was complete. The Red Army now possessed a tank superior to most German models, an industrial machine capable of producing thousands monthly, commanders who understood how to use massed armor, a doctrine evolving rapidly around flexibility and shock. The storm was no longer coming. It was ready. By early 1943, the T-34 was not just a tank, it was a symbol of Soviet resilience. It represented industrial power, strategic adaptation, and the ruthless efficiency of a nation fighting for survival. German commanders realized the war had shifted. Blitzkrieg had met its first true obstacle. The Soviet armored forces were no longer a chaotic defensive formation. They were becoming a disciplined, massed assault force capable of overwhelming even elite German units. Everything that had been built, prepared, and planned, from design meetings in Kharkiv to industrial evacuations across the Urals, had led to this moment. The stage was now set for the clash that would determine momentum on the Eastern Front. The T-34 was no longer an unexpected threat. It was an unstoppable presence. 24th June 1941, Ukraine. The largest tank clash the world had ever seen erupts between Dubno, Lutsk, and Brody. More than 3,500 Soviet tanks, including over 100 T-34s and KV-1s, confront 800 German panzers under General von Kleist. German expectation, light resistance, rapid encirclement, a repeat of France. Reality, a shockwave. Panzer III and Eiffel crews opened fire from 800 meters. Shells hit the T-34s, but failed to penetrate. Sparks burst across angled armor as the Soviet tanks advance with unnerving confidence. A German commander radios in frustration, "Shells bouncing off. We cannot stop them." For the first time in the war, the German armored spearhead feels resistance it can't crush instantly. The battle is chaotic, fast, and sprawling, yet unmistakably different from earlier campaigns. This is where the myth of German invincibility meets the reality of Soviet steel. Near Radekiv, 48th Panzer Corps attempts to block a breakthrough. The Soviet 10th Tank Division charges forward, T-34s leading the line. Panzer 35T and Panzer III gunners fire continuously. Their 37mm rounds ricochet harmlessly. Shocked crews watch as T-34s close distance, firing accurately while absorbing incoming fire. One T-34 under Lieutenant Dmitry Lavrinenko executes a daring maneuver, accelerating through a German formation, destroying 4 tanks before disappearing behind smoke. German officers scramble to deploy heavier infantry guns, dragging 75mm field pieces into direct fire positions. The battlefield becomes a laboratory of desperate improvisation. The Wehrmacht had not trained for this. They had not even imagined this. The T-34's first major engagement does not win the battle, but it upends the core assumptions of German armor doctrine. 26th, 27 June. The battle spreads across a 70-kilometer front as Soviet mechanized corps attempt to counterattack from multiple directions. General Ryabyshev's 8th Mechanized Corps, with over 300 T-34s, pushes toward Dubno with determination. The German 11th Panzer Division finds itself briefly encircled, an unfamiliar and unsettling situation. Crews abandon vehicles to form defensive lines on foot. The speed and shock of the Soviet counterstroke reveal what the Red Army could achieve if logistics and command were more organized. General Franz Halder writes in his diary, "Very heavy fighting. The enemy employs new heavy tanks that our weapons cannot deal with. Luftwaffe intervention is fierce. Stukas dive repeatedly, destroying columns of lighter Soviet tanks. Yet T-34 losses from air attack remain surprisingly low. The armor, angles, and rugged suspension absorb the blasts better than expected. Although Soviet coordination falters repeatedly, the performance of the T-34 becomes the talk of every German headquarters along the southern front." 28th June. Command chaos undermines Soviet efforts. Multiple mechanized corps attack without synchronization, sometimes crossing each other's routes, often running out of fuel mid-offensive. Recovery vehicles are scarce, maintenance crews are overwhelmed, ammo trucks struggle to reach forward positions. Yet despite organizational failures, T-34 crews display remarkable battlefield resilience. Near Radekiv, a single KV-1, the T-34's heavier counterpart, blocks an entire German advance for nearly 24 hours. German engineers eventually bring up 88mm anti-aircraft guns to neutralize it at point-blank range. For German soldiers on the ground, the message is clear. The Soviet Union fields tanks they cannot defeat through conventional means. Dubno-Brody does not end in a Soviet victory, but it marks the first time the Wehrmacht's armored momentum is slowed by something other than operational pauses. The T-34 has made its entrance. By 30th June, the Soviet counteroffensive collapses. Over 800 Soviet tanks are destroyed or abandoned, but fewer than 100 of these are T-34s or KV-1s. The overwhelming majority are outdated BT and T-26 models. German losses are lighter, around 260 tanks, but these numbers alarm Army Group South. The Wehrmacht had never suffered armored attrition at this rate. The psychological effect is even more severe. Frontline commanders now openly admit they face a tank for which they have no immediate counter. Guderian cables Berlin requesting heavier guns and new vehicle designs. The Panther and Tiger programs would later emerge partly from this urgency, but in mid-1941, none of these solutions exist, and the T-34 continues appearing in growing numbers. The first clash has ended, but its consequences ripple across the entire Eastern Front. July-August 1941. The Battle of Smolensk becomes the next major stage for the T-34. Army Group Center penetrates deep into Soviet territory, encircling two Soviet armies. Despite the disaster, the Red Army commits newly formed T-34 brigades to counterattacks near Yartsevo and Roslavl. A single company of T-34s from the 1st Moscow Motor Rifle Division holds a critical bridge for 3 days, absorbing repeated attacks from the 13th Panzer Division. German 50mm guns hit repeatedly, but most shots bounce off or strike harmlessly at angles. General von Bach reports that advancing units must halt to bring up heavy artillery whenever T-34s appear. Blitzkrieg, once fluid and unstoppable, is now forced into pauses and rearrangements. What the T-34 lacks in crew training or radio coordination, it compensates for with design. Its wide tracks allow cross-country approaches that German tanks cannot match. Its diesel engine reduces fire risk and increases operational range. In Smolensk, the T-34 becomes less of a novelty and more of a pattern. October 1941. Operation Typhoon, the German push toward Moscow, begins under worsening weather. Rains transform roads into mud trenches. German trucks bog down. Panzer III and IV tracks, narrower by design, sink deeply. The T-34 thrives. Its wide tracks glide across terrain that stops German vehicles cold. Its engine handles the mud with surprising reliability. Near Mitsensk, Colonel Mikhail Katukov's 4th Tank Brigade springs a series of ambushes against Guderian's 4th Panzer Division. Using forests as cover, T-34s strike German columns at close range, then withdraw at speed before counterfire can be organized. In a single afternoon, Guderian loses 43 tanks and 10 artillery pieces. He later writes, "Up to now we have been fighting with complete technical superiority. Suddenly we face tanks we cannot knock out." This moment marks a turning point in German confidence. The advance toward Moscow slows drastically. Every mile becomes harder than the last. November 1941. Winter arrives early. Temperatures plunge below 30 degrees Celsius. German engines freeze. Oil thickens. Turrets refuse to rotate. Troops wrap weapons in cloth just to keep them functioning. But Soviet diesel engines, including the T-34's V2 power plant, continue running. Its components tolerate cold far better than German gasoline engines. Fresh Siberian divisions arrive, bringing hundreds of new T-34s. Their crews, trained for winter warfare, immediately take the fight to exhausted German units around Klin and Tula. German soldiers nicknamed the T-34 Mickey Mouse due to the appearance of open twin hatches, but the humor masks fear. Morale drops as German troops realize their equipment is failing while the enemy's remains fully functional. The T-34 becomes a symbol not just of armor, but of endurance. 5 to 6 December 1941. The Soviet counteroffensive around Moscow begins. Over 700,000 fresh troops and hundreds of T-34s surge forward along a wide front. Panzer crews attempt to halt the advance, but struggle with frozen mechanisms and poor visibility. Even at 100 meters, their shells fail to penetrate the T-34's angled armor unless striking at perfect angles. Army Group Center is pushed back 250 kilometers over the next 2 months. It is the first major strategic defeat for the Wehrmacht in the war. Hitler fires Commander-in-Chief von Brauchitsch and assumes direct command, a decision that will shape the rest of the war. The T-34's role in this reversal is unmistakable. Its mobility in deep snow, its dependable engine, and its sheer numbers allow the Soviets to sustain pressure despite harsh conditions. The clash has reached its breaking point. German momentum is broken. By January 1942, the road to Moscow is saved. German forces, battered and frozen, retreat to defensive positions. Thousands of vehicles are abandoned due to lack of fuel or mechanical failure. The Red Army, though suffering enormous losses, now replaces tanks faster than Germany can destroy them. T-34 factories across the Urals operate day and night, producing machines at a rate unmatched by any nation at the time. Blitzkrieg has failed. The war transforms into a long, grinding struggle of industry and endurance, the very type of conflict Germany hoped to avoid. The T-34, once a scattered presence, has become the backbone of the Soviet armored force. This is no longer the shock of an unexpected tank. This is the arrival of a weapon that will define the next stages of the war. July 1943. The Eastern Front has settled into a tense stalemate after the winter battles of 1942-43. Both armies prepare for the next major confrontation, one that will determine strategic momentum for the rest of the war. At the center of this standoff lies the Kursk salient, a 240-kilometer-wide bulge in Soviet lines. Hitler plans Operation Citadel, a massive pincer attack meant to pinch off the salient and destroy Soviet forces inside. For this, Germany gathers its strongest armored units, including the newly formed Panther battalions and the elite 2 SS Panzer Corps. Facing them are hundreds of T-34s organized into multiple tank armies, dug in behind belts of defenses stretching for hundreds of kilometers. On the morning of July 5th, the German offensive begins. Artillery roars, tanks advance in tight wedges, the biggest armored confrontation in history is underway. The stage is set for the moment when the T-34 stops being a defensive backbone and becomes the spear that turns the war. South of Kursk, near Prokhorovka, the decisive clash takes shape. The 2 SS Panzer Corps, Leibstandarte Das Reich and Totenkopf, push forward with 494 armored vehicles, including nearly 100 Tigers and dozens of Panthers. The Soviets respond with General Pavel Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army, fielding over 850 tanks, most of them T-34-76. These units have prepared for weeks, digging trenches, coordinating artillery, and rehearsing counterattacks. But Rotmistrov makes a bold decision. He orders a full-speed, head-on armored charge, one of the few times in history a tank army uses mass momentum as a tactical weapon. At dawn on July 12th, fog lifts across a narrow corridor of rolling farmland. Engines roar to life. Thousands of tons of steel begin moving simultaneously. The T-34s burst forward from hidden positions among sunflower fields, their engines thundering as dust rises in towering sheets. The battlefield disappears behind smoke and dust as 2 armored giants move toward each other. This is not just a battle, it is the turning point. At 07:30, the German wedge pushes forward with Tigers at the tip. Their powerful 88mm guns fire accurately from long distances. The first wave of T-34s takes heavy losses, but the remaining Soviet tanks keep accelerating. Visibility drops as the fields fill with dust and smoke. German gunners struggle to track the fast-approaching Soviet wave. The firefight becomes a close-range brawl. At 500 meters, German long-barreled guns punch through advancing T-34s. But at 300 meters, the dynamic shifts. The T-34's 76.2mm gun becomes lethal, especially against the sides of heavier German tanks. Crews report shells flying in every direction, ricocheting off metal, striking tracks, smashing optics. T-34s zigzag at high speed, using terrain dips to close distance. What began as a calculated German advance becomes a chaotic melee. The Soviets' goal is clear. Get close, negate German range advantage. Overwhelmed by numbers and speed, the clash intensifies by the minute. By 09 Chao, the battlefield devolves into absolute chaos. Tanks engage at point-blank range. Vehicles ram each other intentionally. Crews fire from trenches. Dust clouds turn the morning into a dim orange haze. T-34s circle tigers like wolves, firing into vulnerable flanks and rear plates. German accounts describe the scene as a boiling cauldron of steel. Leibstandarte suffers major losses, with dozens of tanks disabled or burning. Das Reich's Panther Battalion, entering its first major battle, is devastated by mechanical failures and well-placed Soviet shots. Out of 96 Panthers committed, only 10 remain operational by the end of the day. Rotmistrov commits his reserves, the 31st Tank Brigade. They hit Totenkopf's flank, forcing the SS units into defensive positions. Every minute of fighting pushes German forces further from their objective. By noon, the offensive has stalled. The crucial moment arrives around midday. German progress stops less than 2 kilometers from their final objective, the Prokhorovka Heights. From this hill, the SS could have dominated the battlefield, but the T-34s have bought time. Every destroyed machine, every immobilized tank, every desperate charge slows the German advance. Then news arrives from the west. The Allies have landed in Sicily. The invasion forces Hitler to reconsider. He cancels Operation Citadel despite objections from his generals, including Manstein, who argues that the German forces need just one more day to secure a decisive victory. That day never comes. The SS Panzer Corps is ordered to withdraw. They leave behind more than 300 tanks destroyed or damaged. The Soviets have suffered greater losses, around 400–500 T-34s, but their factories will replace them within weeks. Germany cannot say the same. After Prokhorovka, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front shifts permanently. The Wehrmacht never again launches a major offensive in the East. Instead, they fight a series of desperate defensive battles, gradually pushed back toward the borders of Germany. Historian Roman Topol offers a concise assessment. Prokhorovka was not a Soviet victory in numbers, but in consequences. It broke the offensive capability of Germany's last strategic armored reserve. The T-34's role is undeniable. Although outgunned at long range, it was fast, reliable, and present in overwhelming numbers. Where heavy tanks like the Tiger were expensive, slow to build, and maintenance-intensive, the T-34 could be replaced, repaired, and deployed rapidly. For the Red Army, the battle proved something essential. Massed armor, coordinated with infantry and artillery, could defeat even Germany's finest armored units. For Germany, Kursk was a warning and a confirmation that they were losing the industrial war. From this moment onward, nothing would be the same. The T-34, which had shocked German troops in 1941 and held the line in 1942, now spearheaded relentless offensives across the Eastern Front. It became not just a symbol of resilience, but of momentum. After Kursk, Soviet tank armies began deep penetration operations. German forces shifted to defensive withdrawals. Armored battles became dominated by quantity and endurance. The Red Army learned to fight with confidence, not desperation. The T-34 was redesigned into the T-34-85, featuring a larger turret and a more powerful 85mm gun. This new version was equal or superior to most German tanks, while still remaining simple enough to produce in enormous numbers. With the turning point secured, the Red Army was ready to reclaim its territory, kilometer by kilometer, city by city. The Battle of Kursk ends not with a dramatic final charge, but with a strategic collapse of German hopes. Operation Citadel, meant to restore initiative to the Wehrmacht, has failed. The SS Panzer Corps withdraws. Entire Panther battalions lie crippled on the fields. German morale drops sharply, yet the Soviet losses are staggering too. Hundreds of T-34s knocked out, many crews gone. But herein lies the decisive contrast. The Soviet Union can replace losses. Germany cannot. For every T-34 destroyed, another rolls off assembly lines within days. For every Panther lost, Germany struggles to manufacture a replacement that requires dozens of skilled workers, thousands of machine hours, and scarce high-grade materials. The aftermath of Kursk proves a brutal truth. In an industrial war, the side with the sustainable war machine, not the finest machinery, survives, and the T-34 embodies that machine. From late 1943 onward, Soviet offensives gather unstoppable momentum. Operation Kutuzov and Operation Rumyantsev begin immediately after Kursk, pushing German units back toward the Dnieper River. T-34s lead the breakthroughs, forming deep armored wedges that tear open German defensive zones. The Red Army is learning fast. Combined arms coordination improves. Tank armies work closely with artillery, engineers, and infantry. Air support becomes more responsive. But the real engine of Soviet advance is industrial. Across the Urals, Tankergrad works day and night, delivering thousands of T-34s every month. In 1943 alone, Soviet factories produce more than 15,000 T-34s, an industrial output Germany cannot match even in its best year. German production stalls under Allied bombing. Factories struggle with shortages, repairs, and transportation disruptions. High-precision vehicles like Tigers require long assembly times and skilled labor, increasingly lost to casualties. The T-34, though imperfect, becomes the perfect wartime tank. It exists in the right place at the right time, in the right numbers. As Soviet forces push westward, the T-34 transforms from a defensive shield into an offensive engine. City after city falls. Kharkiv, Smolensk, Kiev. German units retreat to the Dnieper, then beyond it. The consequences ripple across the Eastern Front. German units lose maneuver freedom. Luftwaffe presence declines as airfields fall. Soviet supply lines shorten, while German ones stretch. Industrial centers behind the Urals continue to surge. Each breakthrough fuels the next. Meanwhile, T-34 crews grow more experienced. Veteran commanders learn how to exploit weak spots in German lines, how to coordinate in large formations, and how to maneuver at speed across forests, rivers, and plains. Even when facing Tigers and Panthers, T-34s use numbers, mobility, and flanking tactics to overwhelm the enemy. The war becomes a contest of endurance, and the T-34 excels at endurance. By 1944, the T-34 evolves into the T-34-85, a decisive improvement. It features a powerful 85mm gun capable of defeating Tigers and Panthers at medium range, a 3-man turret improving situational awareness, a larger turret ring and better optics, more ammunition capacity, improved reliability. The arrival of the T-34-85 levels the playing field in tank-to-tank combat. Even elite German units view the new version with apprehension. Operation Bagration, the 1944 offensive that destroys Army Group Center, becomes the ultimate demonstration. Over 1,700 T-34s spearhead assaults across Belarus, collapsing German positions in weeks. 28 German divisions cease to exist. The Eastern Front, once a place of German dominance, becomes a landscape of continuous Soviet advance. The T-34 is everywhere, bridging rivers, smashing through forests, racing across open plains. Its presence alone forces German units to abandon prepared defenses as Soviet encirclement becomes unavoidable. The consequences are enormous. Germany's strategic defeat is now irreversible. Industrial numbers tell the story more clearly than any battlefield account. Total T-34 family production: T-34-76, 57,300 units. T-34-85, 20,600 units. Combined, nearly 80,000 tanks. This number exceeds the total output of all German tank types combined. Compare production hours. T-34-85, 3,000 man-hours. Panther tank, 155,000 man-hours. Where Germany produced 1 Panther, the USSR produced over a dozen T-34s. This production advantage fuels Soviet success from 1943 onward. Losses that would cripple any other army become temporary setbacks. Entire brigades can be re-equipped within weeks. This manufacturing dominance also influences post-war geopolitics. More than 40 countries adopt the T-34, and some use it for decades. Its presence spans Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The consequences of its design stretch far beyond World War II. The human cost of the war, however, dwarfs all mechanical calculations. The Eastern Front consumes lives at a scale never seen before. Neutral historical estimates record on 27 million Soviet dead, military plus civilian, 4.3 million German military deaths, millions more displaced or wounded. Behind every T-34 was a crew living in harsh conditions. Frostbitten hands, cramped interiors, minimal visibility. Life inside the tank was demanding and dangerous. Yet the T-34 enabled the Red Army to hold, then push, then break the German front. Its reliability kept crews alive in winter. Its numbers allowed breakthroughs. Its mobility rescued encircled units. Its survivability gave inexperienced crews a fighting chance. When Berlin fell in April 1945, T-34-85s rolled through the shattered streets. One famously supported the raising of the Soviet flag over the Reichstag, the symbolic ending of a struggle that began in panic and terror years before. The price of victory was immense. The consequences would shape Europe for generations. Even after the war, the T-34's influence continues. In Korea, 1950-53, early T-34-85s outmaneuver United Nations M24 Chafees and fight Pershings on nearly equal terms. In the Middle East, T-34s appear in conflicts from 1956 to 1973. In Vietnam, Africa, and the Balkans, they become symbols of affordable armored power. Several nations still maintain T-34s in reserve storage, even into the 21st century. A few appear in Ukraine during the 2020s, refurbished and used for defensive purposes, an astonishing testament to their longevity. No other tank in history enjoys such a lifespan. The aftermath of the T-34's wartime service is thus twofold. It becomes a global symbol of rugged, reliable armor. It shapes the armored doctrines of dozens of nations. The consequences of its design ripple far beyond the factories that created it, but numbers and longevity tell only part of the story. The true weight of the T-34 lies in the human cost and strategic transformation it enabled. As the smoke of the Eastern Front settles, the question historians repeatedly ask is simple. Why did the T-34 matter so much? Not why it existed, not why it fought, but why it became the axis around which the largest land war in history rotated. To understand this, we must examine not only its armor or gun, but its philosophy. The T-34 was not designed to be perfect. It was designed to be decisive. Its creators valued simplicity over sophistication, speed of production over precision craftsmanship, battlefield resilience over engineering elegance, strategic effect over tactical superiority. Where German designers sought perfection, Soviet designers sought enough. Enough armor to survive, enough firepower to punch through, enough mobility to maneuver when conditions were worst. This difference in philosophy reshaped the war. The T-34's legacy begins not with what it was made of, but with what it enabled. Military historian David Glantz once summarized the T-34's role with clarity. The T-34 did not win the war alone, but without it the Soviet Union might not have survived long enough to win. His argument rests on 3 points. 1. Technological surprise. In 1941, the T-34 caught Germany completely unprepared. Blitzkrieg depended on outmatching enemy armor, not confronting a tank superior to their own. 2. Industrial scalability. The T-34 was designed to be mass-produced quickly. As the war dragged on, this single factor became decisive. 3. Operational flexibility. Whether in mud, snow, forests, or plains, the T-34 adapted to conditions that often immobilized German units. These factors created a multiplier effect. An army that should have collapsed in 1941 instead endured, reorganized, and eventually counterattacked. The T-34 was not a miracle weapon. It was a survival mechanism. From the German perspective, the T-34 became an uncomfortable teacher. General Hermann Balck wrote after the war, "The appearance of the T-34 forced us to question everything we believed about armored warfare." He noted 4 lessons. Armor design must balance protection with mobility, not rely on thickness alone. Sloped armor is essential, providing greater effective protection without adding weight. Wide tracks are critical for cross-country mobility. Diesel engines reduce fire risk and improve endurance, especially in winter. Captured T-34s underwent extensive German analysis. The Panther tank that later appeared was, in many ways, a direct response, heavier, more complex, but clearly influenced by Soviet design philosophy. Yet the Germans misinterpreted one crucial aspect. They attempted to out-engineer the T-34 rather than outproduce it. The result? A superb tank on paper, but too slow, too expensive, and too delicate to alter the course of the war. The lesson was clear. Innovation means nothing without scalability. Soviet designers themselves reflected deeply on their creation. Alexander Morozov, who replaced Koshkin after his death, often emphasized what made the T-34 effective. We did not build a tank for the engineer. We built a tank for the soldier and for the factory worker. This philosophy shaped every feature. Welded armor that required fewer machining steps, components designed for mass production, a gun powerful enough for most battlefield encounters, a layout that crews could learn quickly, space for upgrades leading to the T-34-85. Morozov also noted that their greatest challenge was not creating a superior tank, but creating one that fit Soviet industry. Every factory, no matter how damaged or relocated, needed to produce T-34s with minimum delay. As a result, the T-34 became the embodiment of wartime pragmatism. It sacrificed comfort, visibility, and high-end precision to achieve what mattered most: presence on the battlefield. A tank that exists in the right place at the right time is more valuable than a perfect tank stuck in a workshop. Strategically, the T-34 taught one of the most important lessons in modern warfare. Quantity creates its own form of quality. One T-34 might struggle against a Tiger, but a battalion of T-34s could overpower a heavy German unit through speed, flanking, and relentless pressure. This principle reshaped Eastern Front combat. Soviet commanders learned to use massed armor in large sweeping maneuvers. German defenders were forced into static defenses, unable to match mobility. The war shifted from short blitzkrieg strikes to long, grinding offensives. Each breakthrough was supported by overwhelming numbers of fast, reliable tanks. The T-34 proved that the outcome of war is not determined by isolated duels between tanks, but by coordinated, large-scale operations. It also showed that technology must serve strategy, not the other way around. Veterans who served in T-34s often recall the same paradox. The tank was both a blessing and a burden. Crews praised reliability in harsh conditions, excellent mobility, the gun's ability to defeat most German tanks early in the war, survivability due to sloped armor. But they also criticized cramped interiors, poor visibility, difficult steering, limited radio availability before 1943. A Soviet tanker later remarked, "The T-34 saved us, but it was not kind to us." This duality reflects the realities of wartime production. The T-34 was not a comfortable machine. It was a utilitarian tool built for a single purpose: to keep moving forward no matter the cost. It succeeded because its strengths aligned with the needs of the moment, while its weaknesses were acceptable under the brutal circumstances of the Eastern Front. From a broader analytical standpoint, the T-34 reshaped how the world viewed armored warfare. Its influence can be traced in post-war designs across Europe and Asia. Key doctrines developed from its success. 1. Mobility is equal to firepower. A fast tank can create its own opportunities: surprise, flanking, and breakthrough potential. 2. Mass production can outweigh tactical disadvantages. A nation that replaces losses quickly holds the strategic advantage. 3. Versatility beats specialization. The T-34 worked in forests, cities, plains, and mountains, unlike many heavy German models. 4. A tank must be easy to repair and maintain. Crews could replace T-34 parts in the field with minimal tools. These lessons influenced NATO and Warsaw Pact designs alike, turning the T-34 into a blueprint for entire generations of armored vehicles. Its impact wasn't ideological or nationalistic. It was mechanical, practical, and undeniable. The T-34 became a case study in how a single engineering mindset can shape a global conflict. Ultimately, the reflection leads to a single conclusion. The T-34 mattered not because it was unbeatable, but because it was sufficient, sufficiently protected, sufficiently armed, sufficiently mobile, and sufficiently simple to produce in massive numbers. No tank of World War II achieved a better balance between capability and practicality. In a war defined by extremes, extreme distances, extreme climates, extreme losses, the T-34 provided the Soviet Union with stability, predictability, and momentum. It turned defeat into survival, survival into resistance, resistance into victory. The T-34's story is therefore not just about machines or battles. It is about how engineering and strategy merge under pressure, and how nations win wars not only through brilliance, but through endurance. As the camera pulls back from the battlefield, the image of a T-34 stands silent against a horizon, touched by smoke and dawn. Its armor, once the center of desperate fighting, now reflects a calmer sky. Its turret faces west, toward the lands it would one day liberate. The war is no longer a swirling storm of fire, motion, and steel. It has faded into history. But the question we began with still lingers. How did a single tank shape the fate of the Second World War? After exploring the front lines, the factories, the strategies, and the human cost, the answer emerges with clarity. The T-34 was not merely a weapon. It was a turning point, forged in urgency, refined in adversity, and deployed with relentless determination. And it changed everything. Welcome back to the final moments of today's documentary. I am Knightley, and together we close this chapter. Picture the Eastern Front after 1943. Endless columns of T-34s roll westward, some battered, some new, some already scarred by earlier battles. Wherever they advance, the map of Europe slowly changes color. Historians often emphasize strategy, logistics, and leadership, all crucial elements. Yet behind every major Soviet offensive lies the silhouette of the T-34. Not glamorous, not perfect, but always present. Its presence is the quiet force that pushes the front line forward. From Kursk to the Dnieper, from Kiev to Minsk, from Warsaw to Berlin, the T-34 becomes a constant companion of the Red Army's advance. Whether in deep mud or frozen plains, its engine continues to growl. Its tracks continue to turn. When the Reichstag finally falls, T-34s park in the square outside, not as trophies, but as reminders of the road that led there. The war ends, but the legacy of the T-34 is only beginning. Today, decades after World War II, the T-34 can still be found in museums, memorials, and even parked quietly in the corners of military bases around the world. Not forgotten, not obsolete, simply timeless. Students of history study its design. Engineers admire its simplicity. Commanders reflect on how it enabled modern armored warfare. For tank crews who once fought in it, the T-34 represents both hardship and hope. Whether viewed with reverence, respect, or analytical curiosity, one truth remains constant. The T-34 is the most influential tank ever built. Not the strongest, not the most accurate, not the most comfortable, but the most decisive. It didn't dominate the war through perfection. It dominated through presence, a presence so widespread and reliable that it became an anchor of strategy for an entire army. This is its legacy, a machine that proved how engineering, industry, and willpower can reshape the course of a global conflict. And yet behind the machinery lies the human story, crews who endured frost, heat, exhaustion, and fear, workers who built the tanks in factories, relocated thousands of kilometers from the front, engineers who refined the design under immense pressure, commanders who learned to wield armored armies across continents. The T-34's legacy is not just metal and mechanics, it is sacrifice, endurance, and adaptation. As we reflect on the long arc of the war, we see that the T-34 teaches a lesson beyond military doctrine. Victory often belongs not to the extraordinary, but to the resilient. A tank that could be repaired quickly, built cheaply, and driven hard became the backbone of a nation's survival. And that survival reshaped the world. The Eastern Front is quiet now, but in our understanding of history, the echoes of those engines still roll forward. So what does the T-34 mean today? For historians, it represents the shift from elite warfare to industrial warfare. For military theorists, it is proof that balance beats specialization. For nations, it is a symbol of endurance under unimaginable pressure. But for millions across the world, the T-34 is something simpler. A reminder of a time when the fate of entire continents hung on decisions made in design rooms, steel mills, and frozen battlefields. And that brings us back to the question we began with. Can a single machine change the course of a global war? Standing on the ruins of Europe in 1945, the answer is yes. Not through perfection, not through elegance, but through sheer presence, the ability to be where it mattered, when it mattered, in numbers that could not be stopped. This is the legacy the T-34 leaves behind. As we close, imagine the camera rising above a quiet field where a lone T-34 rests today. No shells fly, no engines roar. Grass moves gently around its tracks. Time has softened its edges, but not its meaning. The world around it has transformed. New alliances, new borders, new technologies. Yet the lessons it taught continue to influence every modern battlefield, from armored doctrine to vehicle design to industrial planning. The T-34's story is not frozen in 1943 or 1945. It is alive in the way nations prepare for conflict, assess risk, and balance ambition with reality. Its legacy endures because it speaks to something deeper than war, the necessity of adaptation, the power of resilience, and the impact of decisions made under pressure. This chapter closes, but the echoes remain. And now, my friends, we reach the final frame of today's journey. If you followed the story from the opening question to this final reflection, you now understand why the T-34 is far more than a tank. It is an idea. The idea that wartime innovation must answer the needs of the moment, not the desires of ambition. It changed the war by existing in the right form at the right scale at the right time. Before we conclude, I want to thank you for joining me, Knightley, on this cinematic exploration of history, strategy, and engineering. Your curiosity fuels documentaries like this, and your support allows these stories to continue. If you found this journey fascinating, insightful, or inspiring, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more deep historical storytelling. It truly helps the channel grow and reach more viewers who enjoy this kind of long-form narrative. But our journey doesn't end here. A new story approaches. As the screen fades to black, a metallic silhouette emerges. Thicker armor, more angular lines. A gun barrel longer and heavier than anything fielded before. A new chapter in armored warfare, a new challenge on the battlefield. A machine built not for balance, but for dominance. While the T-34 shaped the East, this tank symbolized the ambition of the West. A voice whispers, if the T-34 was the tank that saved a nation, what was the tank designed to terrify one? In the next episode, we explore Tiger Tank, Nazis' superweapon. A story of engineering brilliance, battlefield fear, strategic flaws, and the myth that still surrounds it. Prepare for a new journey, because the age of armored giants is about to begin.